Hi, my name is Candice, or you might know me as Sew Bake Make, and today's video is a sew along for my newest Know Me pattern, which is ME2149. It's a pattern for barrel leg or wide leg pants, and they have a seam down the front of the leg with some top stitching details, a top stitch elastic waistband with a drawstring, and curved front pockets and classic jean back pockets. View A is very classic wide leg view, and view B is a barrel leg view. So that one has a bit more shaping in the leg, and the back pant pieces have a dart at the hip and at the knee. And today I'm going to be making view B, and I'm going to be using this fabric that I have from Blackbird Fabrics. It's this really pretty cotton twill with a leopard print on it. I believe this is the chocolate colorway. But I think this is such a perfect fabric to make view B of the pant. For this pattern, the notions that you're gonna need are elastic and a drawstring or twill tape. And the pattern calls for 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter elastic, but I actually prefer to use 1.5 inch elastic, and I'll show you how I do that in this video. And I'm also going to be using twill tape as my drawstring. So one modification that I'm making to these pants is I'm adding height to the rise. I just wanted them a bit more high-waisted. So what I've done is I've lined up my front pieces together, and I've cut along at the same height for both, just horizontally straight across. And I'm adding some paper behind, and then I'm going to tape this back in place. And I would like to add 2 inches. So I'm going to measure exactly from the cut line up to here, and that is 2 inches. And I'm just going to tape that into place. And when you're increasing the rise, you want to do it on the front and the back. So once I finish with this front piece, which is piece 9, I'll do it to piece 10, and also to the back piece, which is 11. And after you've added your paper in, you can just connect the lines so that they're nice and smooth. I'm just using some spare Christmas wrapping paper to do the back piece because I don't have enough tissue. And for the back, I'm going to add the same amount, so 2 inches. But I also want to add a little bit to the back rise because I have a larger waist to hip ratio, and I just need a little bit more room in the crotch curve. So I'm just going to hinge it slightly like that. That's giving myself another 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch extra on top of what I'm adding to the rise. And you can see here that the lines are not really matching up that well, so you'll just blend them back in so they're nice and smooth. Okay, I have all of my pieces cut out. Here is the pattern piece legend. So I have piece 1 here, which is the front, piece 2, which is the side front, my back and front pockets, which are 3 and 5, the waistband, which is 6, and piece 4, which is the back pant leg. Step 1 is to sew the front to the side front, and you want to make sure that you're checking your notches because the side fronts look really similar. So we're matching the double notches on the front to the double notches on the side front, and we're going to place them right sides together and pin and sew them together. So I've sewn my front to my side front, and now I'm going to finish this seam allowance with my serger, and I'm going to press it away from the center. So our front piece is now assembled. The seam allowance is pressed towards the side seam, so away from the center front. And now we're going to do some top stitching along this seam. So I like to top stitch as close as I can to the seam, so probably a 1/16 of an inch. And then after I do that line of stitching, I'll stitch a 1/4 inch away from that one towards the side seam. So now we'll do another line of stitching a 1/4 inch to the right of this first stitching line I did. Here's how my top stitching looks, and it has caught my seam allowance on the other side. And now we're just gonna repeat this for the other leg. All right, we have our 2 fronts assembled, and they are both top stitched along that center front seam. And now we are going to work on the front pockets. So the front pockets look a little bit different than the back. They're rounded at the bottom. And now we're going to assemble the pockets and then top stitch them onto the fronts. First thing we're going to do is press the top edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. And then we're going to fold towards the front along the fold line and press again. So it should look something like this. And then we're going to stitch all along the lower edge. This is what your pocket should look like. It's got stitching at 5/8 of an inch along the raw edges on the sides and the bottom. And now we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch from the raw edge with a basting stitch just along the bottom curved edge so that we can gather it and get a nice curved edge when we press it. Now we're going to hold on to the bobbin thread of that second line of stitching we just sewed. We're going to gently gather this curved edge, and this will help a lot when we're pressing it because otherwise it will get weird puckers and we don't want that. We're going to trim away the seam allowance here of this facing area so that we can flip it out and it looks nice and sharp. So we've trimmed out that seam allowance and now we can flip it to the right side, and it has these nice little sharp corners, and we're going to press all of these edges in along that first stitching line and use our gathering stitches to make this bottom curved edge look really nice. Now we're just going to stitch this facing part of the pocket down. So we're going to stitch close to the folded edge. And now this is ready to be top stitched onto the front pants. So this is my front pant and I have my 2 notches here, and I'm going to line up the top of my pocket with those notches and just pin it in place. Now we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to top stitch really close to that bottom edge of the pocket, and then we're going to stitch again a 1/4 inch away from that first stitching line. There is one pocket top stitch on, and now we'll just repeat for the other side. Okay, our front pieces are now fully assembled, and we're going to move on to the back pieces. So the back piece has 3 darts. There's one at the waist, one at the hip, and one at the hem. And I have them all marked on the wrong side of my fabric, and I'm going to pin them all the same way. So what I like to do is put a pin in vertically into each of the dart legs. And then I just fold it in half and then put the pins in along the dart legs. And this allows me to be really accurate because they're pinned exactly on the lines. And I'll start stitching from the raw edge to the dart point, and I'm going to leave long thread tails to tie in a knot at the end. I'm also decreasing my stitch length as I get to the point of the dart, which helps make it lay a bit smoother. Now I'm just going to sew the hip dart and the hem dart on this pant, and then do the same thing for all 3 darts on the other back piece. I have all of my darts sewn. So for the waist dart, you want to press that towards the center of the pant, so towards the crotch curve. The hip dart should be pressed up towards the waist, and the bottom hem dart should be pressed towards the side seam. Now we're going to do the back pockets very similarly to the front. We're going to fold the top edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch and press. And then you will fold it down to the fold line and press again. Now we'll stitch along the sides and the bottom at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we will trim the seam allowance and flip it out and press everything in. Next, we're just going to sew close to this bottom edge to secure the facing of the pocket. And now it's ready to be placed on the back pant piece and top stitched on. So I have my front pieces with the pocket sewn on to both of them. I've also serged all of my edges. Next, I'm going to serge all the raw edges of my back pieces. And I'm actually going to wait to sew the back pockets on. In the instructions, it says to sew them on now because that's easiest in terms of assembly. But I like to make sure that they're exactly where I want them once the pants have a waistband on them. So I am going to wait till later to put my back pockets on. And next we're going to sew the inseams. So I have my inseams pinned together, and I've matched the dots and the notches along the inseam. And the back is slightly shorter than the front, just a little bit. So while you're sewing, you're going to stretch between the notch and the top of the inseam just to match them. And we're going to sew that with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we have our inseam sewn. This is our front piece and our back piece. and we just sewed down this seam, and we are going to repeat this for the other front and back pieces. I have my two pant legs now, and they look a bit like this. This is the front, this is the back, and they're sewn at the inseam. And we're gonna sew the crotch seam next. So we have one pant leg right side up. This is the front, this is the back, and we're gonna lay the other pant leg on top so that it's right sides facing. And we're just going to pin, making sure you match up the inseams. And I didn't mark this in earlier, so I'm gonna mark it in now, but this is the stitch line because there is a faux fly on this pattern. So we'll sew from the top of the front crotch down and around and up the back crotch. And this line will blend in to meet 5/8 of an inch seam allowance up to the back. This is what your seam should be looking like. And next we're going to sew another line of stitching just to reinforce this crotch area between the two notches. Next we're going to press this fly extension to the left side. But I'm just going to remark my fly top stitching line because it kind of disappeared earlier. And I'm just going to top stitch along this line here. And you just want to make sure that you're catching your fly extension underneath. And that is the faux fly finished. All right, so now we are going to sew the side seams together. So we have this big piece of, we have our pants that are all connected at the crotch and inseams. So we're gonna fold it so that the front and back are touching, right sides together. And we're going to pin and sew the side seams. I'm actually gonna sew a smaller seam allowance because I'm sewing a medium instead of a large because I found them a little bit too oversized when I made my first pairs. But I do need room at the hips, so I'm gonna sew just beside my serging line, but in the instructions, you should sew with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Before we assemble the waistband, we're gonna sew the buttonholes on the front waistband. So I have marked mine here. They're a little hard to see with my blue marker. So I'm gonna sew those first, and then I'm gonna sew the front and back waistbands together. There are my buttonholes sewn, and I'm just gonna open those up before we sew the waistbands together. Next, we're gonna take our waistband pieces and place them right sides together, and we're gonna sew them together at the short ends with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So in the instructions, you're supposed to press up one of the long edges to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, but I'm gonna be using different elastic than is called for. So I'm gonna do it at slightly less. So I'm gonna press up by 3/8 of an inch, and I'm using 1.5 inch elastic, which is just slightly wider than what the size you need for the casing is. So in the instructions, you are told to use 1 centimeter elastic, and you make separate channels for them. But I'm gonna show you how I do it this way, and I think it's a lot easier. All right, I have my waistband prepped. One of my long edges is pressed up by 3/8 of an inch. And if you're following the instructions, you should do 1/2 inch. So with my pants right sides facing out and my waistband right side facing in, I'm going to place the waistband over top of the pants, and we're going to match up all of the notches and the side seams. Okay, everything is pinned in place. I'm going to use a slightly smaller seam allowance, but if you are sewing according to the instructions, you can sew with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So here is our waistband that's sewn on, and the pre-pressed edge is on the bottom. And now we're going to flip it up. And now we're going to fold it in half and bring this pre-pressed edge down to cover the seam line. And we're going to do this all along the entire waistband. And we're going to pin from the outside because we're going to be stitching in the ditch, and that's going to catch the pre-pressed edge on the inside. And it's going to make it look nice and clean on both the inside and outside. And for my waistband, I'm just going to leave a gap somewhere, probably at the back, of about 2 inches so that I can thread my elastic in. But if you are not doing that, you will have left gaps on the side seams to thread the elastic in. So I have pinned my waistband. It's pinned from the outside, as you can see, and the folded edge is covering the seam line. So now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch in the ditch. So in this seam here, right in the center of it, we're going to stitch from the top, and it's going to hopefully catch the seam allowance that's folded on the inside. And as I'm sewing, I'm just feeling to make sure that folded edge is underneath the seam line because it's very close. You can't really even see the stitching from the front. It's right in the middle of that seam. And then from the back, it looks like, luckily, I did catch all of it. So it should just be catching that fold on the bottom. And I guess I was very lucky because sometimes I miss a spot, or I would say most times. But I did leave one opening for the elastic to be threaded through. So I'm going to thread my elastic through here with a safety pin or a bodkin, and then we will finish the top stitching. So I'm just going to check how long I need my elastic to be, and I'm going to wrap it around my waist and leave about a 1/2 inch extra on each side. So that looks about good. And I'm actually not going to cut it yet just because I might change my mind, but I have marked it on the elastic, and now I'm going to thread it through. Also, one thing I always like to do is I like to round off the corners of my elastic because it makes it easier to thread through. Okay, I have just pinned where I like the elastic, and they are looking good and feeling very good also. So next we're just going to sew this elastic together and then close up the channel. So I've made sure my elastic is not twisted. I'm overlapping it slightly, and I'm going to sew a zigzag stitch. And next we're going to do the same thing we did before. We just have to stretch the waistband as we do it, but we're going to stitch in the ditch to catch this fold and close up the waistband. And the gap should be closed. The next thing to do is top stitch the waistband. I'm going to do one line above the buttonhole and one below. And then the last things will be the back pockets and the hem. And while I'm top stitching, I'm going to stretch my waistband to make sure everything looks nice. Now this is a lot more finicky because the pants are assembled, but I like being able to look at my pocket placement before I sew them on. Now that it's on, we're gonna sew another top stitch 1/4 inch away from that first line, and then we'll repeat the same for the other pocket. The last step is to hem, and the instructions tell you to fold up 5/8 of an inch and then tuck the raw edge under, but I don't really want to do that. I'm gonna press my hem up 1/4 inch and then up by 3/8 of an inch so that it equals the same hem amount, but it's just a little easier to work with that way. So we'll press 1/4 and then 3/8. Okay, so here are the finished pants. I think the cotton twill was so perfect for this pattern. It has a nice amount of structure so that you can really see the barrel shape of the pants. And I just love the fit. They're just a really easy and comfortable pair of pants to wear. And I think the leopard is just so much fun and elevates them a little bit. I found this brown drawstring cord in my stash, so I thread that through the drawstring channel. And I think they are perfect. I hope you guys love this pattern, and I hope that you found this video so long helpful. And I can't wait to see your makes. Make sure to tag me on Instagram or TikTok if you make them.